Welcome to STAT's virtual event, The Next Frontier of Drug Pricing Reform, sponsored by Calderos. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rachel Kors, Washington correspondent here at STAT. And I'm sure you know how this works by now, but before we get started, a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons. Use the chat feature to chat amongst yourselves or to send a message directly to the STAT team. Please do not put your questions for us in the chat. If you do have a question that you would like us to ask during the event, please use the Q&A feature to type your question and we will try to answer it live. In the Q&A window, you should also be able to see the questions that other attendees have asked and upvote the questions that you would most like to see answered. We will be taking questions throughout the chat, so please don't wait until the end to submit. This is part of what makes these events engaging and fun. We want to hear from you, and thanks again for being here. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Brent Dover, who's the CEO of Calderos, for a sponsored introduction of today's event.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brent Dover. I'm the CEO at Calderos, a technology company working to solve complex challenges associated with drug discount programs. I want to welcome everyone joining us today, including our distinguished guests, and I'd like to offer a special thank you to the team at STAT for having Calderos as today's sponsor and for hosting this timely and forward-looking discussion. We're all here today to talk about the next frontier of drug pricing reform with a focus on the challenges and opportunities faced by pharmacy benefit managers and how any reforms can benefit patients. I know that all of us on the call today ultimately care deeply about how our actions can impact patients and their care. At Calderos, we have set our sights on the systemic issues that have created inefficiencies and frustration in America's drug discount and rebate programs, and how these can be improved to positively impact patients. These programs, like the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program and the 340B Drug Pricing Program, are vital to patient communities across the country, but have faced significant headwinds from misaligned incentives, data silos, lack of data transparency, outdated technology, and substantial administrative overhead and costs. These challenges have allowed for inaccurate payments in the form of duplicate discounts to become an unavoidable problem. The total sum of duplicate discounts that occurs when these programs overlap is still not yet precisely known, but we at Calderos estimate that the percentage of inaccurate claims faced by manufacturers may range from as low as 2% to as high as 15%. This wide variation is tied to what type of drugs are sold and how commonly they are used. In the 7 years since Calderos started our business in 2016, our data-driven platform has helped identify almost $1 billion in potential misapplied discounts across managed care and Medicaid rebates. And we estimate that we have only analyzed between 5 and 10% of all drug discounts requested and paid during that 7-year period. Despite the staggering non-compliance figure, we believe we are only scratching the surface of this problem space. It's frustrating because identifying and resolving these misapplied discounts creates a huge administrative burden for the entire system, one that takes up substantial administrative cost, time, and energy from our already overburdened healthcare professionals and others working across the drug discount programs. These are also funds that become lost in our opaque system, resources that otherwise could go to developing new treatments, increasing healthcare access, or helping lower prices for patients. Fortunately, at Calderos, our capabilities and scope are growing every day. We consistently increase the number of pharmaceutical manufacturers, healthcare providers, and other partners we work with. We've done this by investing in our technology and our partners and in data transparency, making a point to listen to all stakeholders to strengthen discount program integrity. We're now applying these same principles as we build out a more robust commercial discount monitoring solution that fosters greater collaboration between drug manufacturers and pharmacy benefit managers, supporting adherence to mutually agreed upon contracts that are easier to operationalize. In comparing our work of analyzing commercial rebates against our robust history in Medicaid Drug Rebate Program and its overlap with the 340B Drug Pricing Program, it is evident that the risk of overlap between drug discount programs with commercial rebate results in a higher risk of ineligible contract rebates than what happens in the statutory spaces. In the end, these are the same kind of misapplied discounts that have driven up costs across the system. We're very excited to employ our best-in-class data engine and drug discount management platform to give PBMs and manufacturers more actionable data in order to reduce ineligible rebates and support stakeholder efforts. We think that this is an example of the savings that could be unlocked across the industry if transparency and technological innovation are focused on healthcare's most stubborn challenges. Collaboration isn't always easy, but it is often the most effective way to create real change. Fortunately, new technology and fresh thinking have created an environment that welcomes more to this collaborative process. For those out there who are interested in learning more about what Kalderos is doing to foster engagement and innovate in this space, I encourage you to visit us at kalderos.com. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it back over to the STAT team and our excellent lineup of guests. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you to Brent for that introduction. And here to join me for the first part of today's discussion, please welcome Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee, former chairman of the Senate Finance and Judiciary Committees, and he's a former president pro tempore of the Senate. Welcome, Senator.
Glad to be with you. Thank you for having this very important subject. Let me say that PBMs are the most prominent discussion this year on drug pricing, but it isn't the only thing that we should be talking about as far as drug pricing. But it seems to me that this is the one that's going to get the attention, if any bill gets attention this year.
Exactly. So it's a timely conversation. So you've been working on healthcare issues for a very long time. Tell me when you kind of got introduced to the issue of kind of the role that pharmacy benefit managers are playing in negotiating discounts between drug makers and insurers, and kind of your work on this issue.
Sure, that's very important. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I think it was about the year 2018, but I believe this problem has been going on for a long time, that we probably should have been discussing a long time before 2018. But I happened to visit a pharmacy in Winterset, Iowa, Montrose, and find all about the clawback of money and the problems that the PBMs seem to be giving, and yet making a lot of money, and nobody knows what they were doing. And it's such a secret operation that by visiting with the Winterset pharmacist and then listening to several other pharmacists over a period of years, it didn't take me long to get involved in it. And the first thing we did was to look at PBMs versus the insulin industry.
Right. And so you did an investigation into kind of that price, that environment, and how that was working. I'm curious, did that spur any action for you? Tell me about, I know you have some legislation that would kind of change the transparency and how PBMs operate. So I just wanted to ask kind of what your solutions are based on what you found.
Before you get into the solutions,
Sure.
and I'll ask you to ask that question again from this standpoint. Wyden and I started working on PBMs, insulin, and I think that study went on for almost 2 years. We issued a fairly long report, I think December of 2020, that would give people a lot of background information that we learned about pharmaceuticals just in regard to the insulin. But of course, it affects all pills as far as I'm concerned. And so then it was about that time that the Grassley-Wyden bill that was put together that had 36 different provisions in it, but a lot of those provisions were dealing with PBMs. Obviously, Grassley-Wyden, even though it got out of committee 19-7 or 9, whatever the vote was, it didn't become law because the Democrats took over and they wanted a different approach. And of course, we're in the middle of that different approach, but that doesn't do anything about PBMs. That's why we still have to pass the legislation. So then I started working with Senator Cantwell. Now, if that history doesn't answer your question, then give me a follow.
That's helpful. Yep, that's helpful context there. So tell me, in your work with Senator Cantwell, kind of what are you trying to address in this drug pricing system?
We're trying to address the problems with DIRs. We're trying to address the problem of spread pricing very specifically, but then in a more general way, basically we are saying to the Federal Trade Commission, take on this responsibility, study it, make public what PBMs do, and then maybe that transparency may not be enough. In fact, some people say our bill doesn't go far enough, but I start with a proposition, let's get done what we can get done. So transparency brings accountability, and I think if people know more about how PBMs operate, how much they profit out of it, how much the consumers don't profit out of it, how much it might help health insurance, how much it help the companies themselves, pharmaceutical companies themselves. You try to get as much information as you out, and maybe that'll bring some attention to it and get things done without a lot of legislation. But if it does take action, the FTC, for instance, because the three biggest PBMs have about 85% of the business, then of course, if there's any collusion, FTC's got the ability to immediately take action. So I'm counting on the FTC to do this and do it quickly. Now I have another bill in with Klobuchar on transparency and the FTC to study it, because in 2018, I wrote a letter to the FTC to study it. They didn't take any action until very recently. I had a telephone conversation with the chair, Khan, of FTC, and emphasized the importance of this and the fact that the average FTC study can't take 2 years. We need to have action right now and reports right now. Now, I don't have any results of that telephone conversation, but I do trust that Linda wants to do the right thing and take on, she's not afraid to take on the big cahoots here, the big 900-pound gorillas here in Washington, D.C., and I expect some action. I think we will get some action. But just in the meantime, we need the Cantwell-Grassley bill to make sure that it can go one step further.
So tell me, why do you think this discussion around PBMs and kind of the fees that they're charging and how much they're charging government programs and the relationship between these entities has picked up so much momentum now in Congress? I mean, this has been going on for a long time. Why now?
Well, I think it's a direct result of Wyden and I bringing attention to this in insulin, and then the local pharmacists talking more about it. So maybe I didn't hear much about it before 2018, but I did hear some about it before 2018. But boy, has it boiled to the surface in Iowa. I've held several meetings with pharmacists in different parts of Iowa, and it's just a big thing for them. In other words, every state isn't a rural state like Iowa, but most of the states are, and we're losing our local pharmacists. And sometimes the local pharmacist is almost the only healthcare delivery person you have in a whole county. And so it's important not only on the pricing of drugs or what's in a formulary and all the power that they have with rebates and all and the formulary and all that stuff. It's very important to keep these businesses in small towns America going, because it might be the only people that can help with healthcare.
Exactly. So, and I know your bills out there aren't the only ideas in the Senate right now to help kind of make changes to how this works. The Senate Health Committee, chaired by Senator Bernie Sanders, passed legislation out of their committee recently. The Senate Finance Committee, which you used to chair, is currently drafting legislation on this issue right now. I mean, how do you see it all playing out in the next, few months, maybe to the end of the year? How do all these different approaches fit together?
Well, I think first of all, Senator Schumer is committed to bringing up something on PBMs. That's a very big advancement from what we've ever had in this area, that the leader of the Senate's willing to take hold. For instance, between the Cassidy bill and the Cantwell bill, they're very complementary. In the case of the Cassidy bill, they use a regulatory approach through HHS as opposed to our using an enforcement approach through FTC. But I think that can be compromised. I believe that that they're very compatible, except for the fact that the Cassidy bill, because of the jurisdiction of that committee, it can only deal with health insurance, whereas we can deal with health insurance plus Medicare and Medicaid. And if the finance committee brings out a bill, they can only deal with Medicare and Medicaid. So I think that the working between Cassidy and Cantwell, I should say Cantwell, is the best chance of putting a package together that can get 60 votes in the United States Senate. But there's one thing very important to Senator Schumer that includes something on insulin. And we're trying to put those elements together now.
Right. So my understanding is that you've said that you won't support any legislation capping copays for insulin without PBM reform. Is that an accurate statement about your position?
If I had a chance to vote on insulin bill separate, I would vote for the 35% cap that's in the Collins bill. But if you can't get insulin, if insulin is a driving force to get PBMs, that's why your question is legitimate, and why the answer to your question is I want the two tied together.
So you want the two tied together. Do you think you said that Senator Schumer is supportive of this legislation. Is Senator McConnell? Is your leadership team willing to whip the votes to support something like this on the Republican side? Are
you talking about the Republican leadership team? Well, they talk in such generalities on this subject that it's difficult for me to tell where they're coming from. But I'll give you a comparable situation that we went through 4 or 5 years ago. And that's the First Step Act. It never came up and never came up and never came up under Republican leadership because they didn't want to split up the caucus. Okay, when the bill finally came up, it passed 87-12. We're hearing the same thing. We don't want to do something splitting up the caucus. But we've got a major problem here with PBMs deciding rebates, deciding the price of drugs, probably being an instrument to drive up the price of drugs. And nobody knows what they're doing. And they're having a big impact on the pricing of drugs and the formularies. And we at least ought to know what they're doing, particularly from the standpoint of the federal government being the biggest purchaser of drugs, and we got to save the taxpayers some money. So it's very important that we move on this from both a Republican caucus standpoint and a Democrat caucus standpoint.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that's helpful. I also just wanted to ask about the insulin cap, the $35 a month cap. Are you worried at all that disagreements within the Republican caucus could derail a package if people aren't able to agree on which approach is best?
Well, that's the major question that's standing in the way of getting it done. And right now, it's not that I don't want to answer your question, yes or no, but we're working on trying to put a package together that will accomplish what you and I want to accomplish. And that's kind of the 900-pound question.
Okay, fair enough. I'll keep asking. We have an audience question about the idea that I think the Trump administration advanced that rebates should be passed along to patients at the pharmacy counter. We saw regulations on that, and Democrats used canceling that rule to pay for a lot of other priorities last Congress, from gun reform to the Inflation Reduction Act. So I was curious what your thoughts are on an approach like that would guarantee that rebates would be passed to patients directly at the pharmacy counter.
Well, without having that in our legislation, I would hope that the consumer would benefit from our legislation. And the main point is, we don't even know whether they benefit at all now with the work of PBMs. So we need to have that knowledge. And I don't think I would be opposed to some recognition that consumers ought to benefit from a price reduction or from rebates.
Okay, that's helpful. And certainly we'll track the legislation going forward. One other audience question from, I think, Brett Paulson. He's asking about the potential that PBMs will shift some of what they're doing to they're called GPOs, or group purchasing organizations. And the FTC did just expand their inquiry into PBMs to include these group purchasing organizations. As you know, making, policy on healthcare issues is hard because the industry changes to adapt so quickly. So are you working or thinking about the role that GPOs play in this process right now?
The answer is no at this point, but I think that person asking that question is asking a very appropriate question. I wish I knew exactly how to solve a potential problem. It may not be a problem, but I do know this, that PBMs are secretive enough. We don't know how they operate. I think they have the sophistication of doing everything they can to avoid the tremendous impact this is going to have on their roles as middle people between the companies and the consumer. And so obviously I'm not going to just write off anything that they might do, but I think we got to look at what can be accomplished now and then find out if there's another problem down the road that you got to take care of because of GPOs. But I don't know how to take care of it right now.
Okay, that's fair. Yep. Well, I guess Congress will address that problem as it comes. And this is a little bit related to, I think, the broader potential package moving through the Senate as opposed to PBM specifically. But I know you're also on the Judiciary Committee. So I just wanted to ask about the prospects of other legislation that you have promoted about, pay for delay arrangements and, other patent issues that's, passed out of the Judiciary Committee, and whether you feel like, that has a future attached to PBM reform and insulin as well.
I sure hope so. It's very necessary to do it. And then there's another bill that we have in that goes by the acronym STOP, where there's a scheme of where you can appeal to the FDA for a process that I won't bother to explain, but it's a process that could slow down generics get on the market, just like pay for delay or whatever we call that bill. It's a Klobuchar-Grassley bill or a Grassley-Klobuchar bill. Doesn't matter who's the lead on it. We both are working together in a bipartisan way to accomplish it. But isn't it idiotic that we have a patent for a certain number of years and that patent runs out? While the patent's in place, the price is high. When the patent runs out, you expect the price to go down when there's competition. And then the company with the patent makes a deal with the generic company, keep it off the market to keep the price high. Those shenanigans shouldn't go on. If you got the protection of the patent for a certain number of years, you aren't anybody else, any better else than anybody else that has a patent. You ought to be able to live with the years of exclusivity you have. And these schemes like STOP and pay for delay or whatever you call it, we need to take care of it. In other words, I'm not a person that likes a lot of government interference in the free marketplace, but we have a responsibility to be a fair referee to make sure that the marketplace is working.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I have one more question about the PBM reform prospects. And I think one of the challenges on the regulatory side, at least, that I think has come up in Congress as well, is that the Congressional Budget Office sometimes thinks that changes to how PBMs work could raise premiums for patients and could cost the federal government money, depending on how it's structured. So I just wanted to ask you how you feel like the CBO and the conversations about premiums are factoring into the debate right now.
Well, it's an issue that comes up, but because of the lack of transparency and knowing how PBMs work, just like I said previously, who benefits from it? Health insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the consumers, or the local pharmacists, or the PBMs? We don't know. And it seems to me that Cantwell Grassley will solve that problem. And if there's a problem of unfair shifting, then we take care of that problem at that time. I don't know how you can anticipate, like you bring up GPOs, you bring up the impact on health insurance companies. If we were had the brains to think all those things through, we might get legislation in 15 years from now.
That's true. Sometimes it takes that long. But I just wanted to open it up for a final kind of comment from you, Senator. Is there anything that you wanted to leave our audience with, as they're following this conversation about PBM reform that's happening in the Senate, and just any parting words on where you see that going?
Yeah. Well, anybody, I don't know how many people are involved here, but they've all got two senators representing their states. Get a hold of them, tell them how important it is, tell them to write letters to the editors saying, we don't know anything about PBMs. There could be an unfair, there could be a very good reason why the price of drugs are going up, but we ought to at least know what they're doing, and get on talk radio, write letters to your senator, emails to them, all those sort of things. But most importantly, we've got to pass legislation. We can't put up anymore with somebody that some group of people that we call middle people between the companies and the consumer without knowing what they're doing, particularly when they're raking in a lot of taxpayer money. So from the standpoint of helping the consumer, from the standpoint of helping the taxpayer, PBM legislation must pass.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your insight. And I think that's about all the time we have for this part of the conversation. Thank you so much, Senator Grassley, for joining me. And I hope you get to visit lots of Dairy Queen this summer. I will pass this over to my colleague, Ed Silverman, for the next panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. And here to join me for the second portion of today's event, please welcome Dr. Alex Oshmansky. He's the CEO and founder of the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company. Alex, nice to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Nice to see you again, Ed.
Likewise. I have one housekeeping thing for all the folks in the audience. If you have a question during our session, please remember to put it in the Q&A portion of the screen, not the chat box. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So, Alex, I want to start off by asking you a forward-looking question, because ever since you and Mark Cuban got started on this project a couple of years back, a little more really, you've made a splash many times over, and a lot of the activities have focused on either nibbling around the edges or going directly for some of the functions that are handled by pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. We just heard Grassley talk about this extensively. How soon, though, do you think your company can really pick off in a big way some of the services that are provided by a PBM and essentially replace that? How long is it going to be, and what is it you need to do? Because ever since you launched, you've taken different steps. You've started issuing cards to consumers who can go to a pharmacy. Of course, you have the website where they can visit and buy predominantly generic drugs. You've taken some other things which we'll get to, but just to start off, I want to hear that crystal ball answer you have?
Yeah, well, my hope is sooner rather than later. But sort of the approach we've taken, we essentially run into this chicken and the egg problem with trying to take on a lot of these services that PBMs offer, which is in order to be able to, provide enough value to the big pharmaceutical companies to want to work with us, we have to bring business to the table in the form of covered lives, generally, particularly for expensive brand drugs that really require some form of insurance coverage, some payer coverage. But at the same time, it's hard to get that payer business without the brand name drugs already under contract. Our sort of way of getting at trying to solve this chicken and the egg problem has been through the development of our direct-to-consumer cash pay platform, which blew up in a way, it sounds like just something you say, but really in a way we didn't anticipate. We have millions of people signed up for the site now, and that's enabled us to begin having conversations with the brand name pharma companies and starting adding those products to our site. Now it's taken us about a year and a half of contracting to figure out how to work through making those contracts work to provide transparent net acquisition cost pricing in the context of all the other obligations that big brand name pharma has, Medicaid best price considerations, most favored nation clauses, and their wholesaler contracts, but we got there, and I'm very proud of that. And now, we're hearing interest from payers, particularly from regional health plans who feel like they may have been taken advantage of by the big national plans or otherwise just don't have a voice, that we may be able to take on other services of, what it is effectively PBM functioning. We wholeheartedly embrace this concept of modularizing the PBM. Taking the different components and owning different pieces of that where we feel like we could add value. So in particular, we've begun contracting for retail networks. That's sort of in a beta testing phase at this point, our Team Cuban card, as we're calling it. Mark kind of cringes at the name, but I like it. We've got, sort of 80 independent pharmacies currently in the network where we're, just beta testing the infrastructure, making sure it works at the moment. But that should be expanding rapidly in the back half of this year. We anticipate several thousand pharmacy locations within our retail network, which can then also potentially be leased out to other to payers as a standalone network. And in the meantime, working with payers to begin negotiating net acquisition cost pricing as well to pass along. So taking on those contracting functions, while at the same time, working with other transparent PBMs who might be interested in providing the clinical services, the customer support, the adjudication platform. We don't really see a need at the moment to take on the entirety of PBM functions. If we can get at the core parts where we feel like we can add a lot of value, which is those contracting components, and finding ways to pass along transparent pricing within the confines of existing obligations that everyone in our complicated system has. Sorry, long-winded answer there.
No, that's interesting. Just going to ask you a few numbers questions. How many drugs are available through the site now? How many of those are generics? You mentioned how many pharmacies you have in this nascent network. How many cards, though, have you issued to consumers? Could you bring us up to date on some of this so we get some perspective as to how you've been moving along?
Oh, sure. So for the first part of that, I think we have about 1,100 different SKUs on our site right now. I think that's about 350 to 400 different molecules. And that's, we're getting pretty close to the point. I think it's near most of the utilization that we can sell. It's about 80% of generic utilization, with much of the remaining 20% being controlled substances, REMS products, other drugs which are difficult to sell through a mail order platform. My personal ambition, which may be overly ambitious, is for us to get full transparent pricing on all generic products by the end of the year. I have, will that be successful? We'll work towards it. But a number of those may be primarily distributed through our retail network because there's a number of product acute care medications, antibiotics, cold chain products, which, are better to, it's just logistically more straightforward to distribute them, and, makes more sense to distribute them at local community pharmacies or grocers at point, sort of point of, at retail locations, essentially.
So what you're
So,
saying that you're saying that they would be incorporated into the network through which the products would be available on the site to consumers who would then, instead of having it shipped, they would go to a local pharmacy because of the nature of the product?
Exactly. It is surprising. We do sell a surprising amount of antibiotics. I think that's for patients who are, for one reason or another, on a chronic antibiotic. If they need, chronic amoxicillin for one condition or another. But for most of the time, if you have strep throat, the best course of action is not to wait a week. For that to be mail order delivered. It's to go to your local pharmacy for obvious reasons. So, we've essentially contracted with a network that, pledges to basically honor our pricing. Now that pricing is, the same transparent pricing we have on our site. Our net acquisition cost price, which we reveal publicly, 15% markup on the ingredient cost. For the retail pharmacy, we offer an $8 dispense fee, which is a combination of the $3 pharmacist fee from our mail order and our $5 shipping and handling. So it winds up being the same net amount to the consumer, while being more viable for a location that has to manage a physical location. And that becomes the total cost of the product. In addition to the local pharmacy, we've stood up, in partnership with another wholesaler and a wholesaling platform. So if there are products, ultra high cost generic products like imatinib, abiraterone, mesalamine, that are not available from the big wholesalers at a price that makes it viable to honor our pricing, you can actually order those products from us. So we've always operated as a wholesaler in our licensing, primarily wholesaling to ourselves, but we're starting to open that up more broadly to other pharmacies that want to take advantage of the type of pricing that we offer.
You mentioned the chicken and the egg before. Trying to appeal to payers means having more product to offer them to pass along ultimately to the employee, the consumer. On the other hand, you have to have enough of a network to get the brand name companies in particular interested. You did get started on that, a couple of months ago, I think, with a couple of Johnson & Johnson diabetes products. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
And they're older products. Just tell us a little bit how that deal came together. And because the one thing I noticed on the key drug, the company J&J had said that, they were seeing a decline in net price. And the patent expires, I think, just about a year from now. So it seems like it's an example, and you have to get started somewhere, I understand that, but it seems like an example of low-hanging fruit. So tell us how that came about and how you make the leap, though, from the low-hanging fruit to a brand name drug that doesn't have a patent expiration coming up, a patent cliff right in front of us, so that, and what does it take to convince that brand name company to play ball, as opposed to the calculation J&J apparently made that, well, hey, it's an older product. Let's just, see if we can extend its life to the Cubans company.
No, we love starting with the low hanging fruit.
Most people
starting
do,
starting with the generic products and moving from there. Clay Christensen's classic model of disruption. The incumbents always start with sort of the low hanging fruit and unexpectedly move up from there. But right now we're positioning ourselves primarily as a market access channel for the big pharma companies for a host of practical applications. like you were mentioning, products that are at the end of their life cycle, products that have a high consumer cash pay component already, think lifestyle products or fertility products, that sort of thing. Products that are just at the beginning of their cycle and still are under P&T review by the major PBMs, 6-month window where you have no market access without a cash pay component. But more broadly, there's a third of Americans, approximately 100 million people, that are still either uninsured or have a high deductible plan or underinsured. And what they see at the ticket counter, so to speak, at the retail window when they present their insurance card is AWP. They see WAC, which is oftentimes grossly inflated. So we're also positioning ourselves as a sort of unique market access channel for products that have a very high gross to net bubble, which may scare away patients who might otherwise be willing to pay the cash price.
Before you
sorry,
continue, just
Yep.
at the chance that not everyone knows what a gross to net bubble is, could you just take a moment to tell folks who aren't familiar with the term?
Oh, sure. Going back to Senator Grassley's conversation around insulin. So it's the differentiation between the sort of list price, average wholesale price of the drug, and the amount that the pharmaceutical company actually gets paid, the so-called adjudicated price. For insulin, notoriously has a very high gross to net bubble. The list price can be, $350, $400 for a vial. The net price that we generally hear behind the scenes is closer to $25 for a vial. For that, for insulin products in particular, you can imagine a pharmaceutical company might, and obviously that's product has very specific dynamics to it. But say a similar product, we say that, we could potentially dramatically increase the market of that kind of product by providing an alternative market access channel for those patients to see the true price of the drug rather than the artificially inflated price of the drug.
What extent do you hear from the brand name manufacturers that maybe they want to work with you more, but they're a little worried about retribution from the large PBMs?
Yeah, no, I think the premise of the question is exactly right. What we hear, I was talking to a big pharma CEO at some point, and they said, we do all the R&D, we take all the legal liability, we take all the flack from the public, because everyone knows what a pharma company is, nobody knows what a PBM is. Manufacturing is hard. I can tell you, as someone's setting up a sterile fill finish facility, it's legitimately, chemical engineering is hard. Like, why do the PBMs get 30% of the revenue? That's crazy. So, I don't think the pharma companies like the status quo any more than the payers, or most certainly the patients do. I think they're just kind of looking for an excuse, frankly, to work with us. Because I think they want to see the status quo change too. But, there's different, in our sort of behind the scenes conversations, different appetites for, the amount of innovation or, risk that a company might be willing to take on to try to innovate the system as a whole. And certainly very grateful to our initial partners, Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, Pfizer, IBSA, who've been willing to try out our platform and see how net acquisition cost pricing, how transparent pricing works for their patients. And I think the initial feedback has been great.
Quick question. See if you can answer this in 90 seconds or less, because I've got a skeptic out there in the audience who says this sounds like a lot of spin. How does the patient really benefit?
The prices are lower. Not really sure.
Give me an example real quick before we get back into the meaty stuff.
Oh, sure. So Invokana, the list price, the difference, our price is around, $200 to $250 for a month supply.
That's the J&J diabetes drug.
Yeah, that's right. And the next best price from any discount card program, which is based off of a WAC discount, is close to $600 for a month supply. Also, the most dramatic edge case examples are, I think, specialty products. There are several generic chemotherapy products, other therapeutic classes, which are classified by several of the big PBMs as specialty products that you have to buy at wildly inflated costs from their in-house specialty pharmacies. I'm looking at drugs like imatinib, the tyrosine kinase inhibitor for chronic myelogenous leukemia, chemotherapy. Patients tell us that they're asked to pay $2,000 to $3,200 copay if if they have a high deductible plan. Meanwhile, on our site, it's $30 for that same month's supply. So we have dozens of patients write us on social media, physical letters every week. We have a once weekly all hands call in the company where we showed, as a team building thing, morale boosting. We show these letters, and patients tell us, "Hey, I was going to have to sell my house to afford my medicine. I wasn't eating meals. I was skipping meals because I couldn't afford my medicine. I just thought I was going to die because I had no way to get my chemotherapy." So these are not abstractions. These are very specific ills of society that we can have a very profound impact on now. So, very, very proud of the work that our team is doing there.
Okay, I'd like to pivot to the big headline that you were part of recently. This concerns the biosimilar version of Humira. I say Humira, tomato, that AbbVie sells. Coherus Biosciences is on July 1st going to sell their biosimilar version. I know there are some last-minute legal machinations between those two companies, and as a result, you're feeling a little constrained about some of the things you can say. Before I ask you a question, I just want to briefly tell folks exactly where your company fits into this, and then ask you about it. So for those who were not aware or just need a reminder, earlier this month, Coherus announced plans to sell its biosimilar version at a steep discount. It'll be targeted really toward the corporate market, employers, health plans, but also will work with Cuban's company to make the medicine available directly to consumers for still less. Specifically, the Coherus biosimilar will carry a $9.95 list price for a carton of 2 auto injectors. That's an 85% discount from the $6,900 that AbbVie charges for its brand name drug. And at the same time, Coherus will sell its biosimilar at a discount to Mark Cuban. That's the company you run, Alex. And your company will market it for about $579. That's all public knowledge. So I think the question I have is how extensive do you think this will work its way into the consumer market? Because while, yes, that is a lower price, it's still a whole bunch of money per month for many people. Do you have any data on how many folks are currently paying cash for the brand name drug? Like if you go to the GoodRx site and see what's what this week versus last month. Where do you see this going? How much of a dent do you think you're going to be able to make over the next 12 months?
Good question. And I will preface it, it may sound a little silly from me, but I'm going to talk in broad swaths about biosimilars in general rather than any specific product. Forgive me to the audience. But yeah, the big question is what'll be the adoption of biosimilar products, and truly more broadly, because they are biosimilars rather than biosimilars, emphasis on the similar, as opposed to complete carbon copies of existing products. But that being said, there's differences in batches of innovator products as well. So isn't the innovator a biosimilar of itself from batch to batch? But in any case, what'll be, I think what I'm hearing from most of the manufacturers who are introducing biosimilars is they anticipate most of the market to come from new starts this year, as opposed to conversions of patients to the existing, particularly patients that have good coverage, good plan designs, as opposed conversions from the brand product to a biosimilar. That being said, we have heard from PBMs that think that savings to plans could be enormous depending on how aggressive they are about converting patients. At Cost Plus, we don't want to forcibly convert anyone from a product that's working for them to a biosimilar if their provider doesn't feel like that's in their interest. But what we've heard is, on the rheumatologic products more broadly, if a biosimilar works for a patient, we might see somewhere between 5 to 14% savings on overall drug spend for patients. That's not just on the rheumatologic products, that's on all total drug spend, to give a sense of how much of drug spend this can be if biologics are or biosimilars are adopted more broadly. And it'll be interesting. The PBMs, to their credit, really did speed generic adoption 20 years ago. That's one of the good things they did. We try to be fair and balanced as much as we can. We harp a lot about the PBMs, but that is one of the positive things they did. It's within their ability to do something similar now with the biosimilar market coming into place. But is there so much addiction to the rebates coming from these products? Well, are there misaligned incentives? It'll be really interesting to see how the market plan moves forward. But yeah, the potential savings for payers are enormous. Are
you talking health plans? Are you talking self-funded employers primarily? Which animal are you really referring to here?
I think it's all of the above in terms of the potential impact. Senator Grassley was saying government-sponsored plans, payer, plan sponsors in terms of insurance companies, self-insured employers. Probably the groups we'll be working with primarily are regional health plans, I imagine, and large self-insured employers. But I think the overall market space more broadly could benefit substantially.
I want to turn back to a question I started to ask you before. If your company is going to sell a biosimilar for several $100s a month, to what extent do you think that is actually going to make a splash? Because it's still a fair amount of money. When I talk to someone who's a rheumatologist and is very actively involved in these issues because of her perch, she said, well, the announcement from companies we mentioned before, that's a great price, but I'm not so sure how many of my patients could afford that, even if it is, better than, whatever is available or out there right now. So how do you see that playing out? Yes, you're going to have a good price, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to snowball and a lot of folks can afford it.
No, that's a very good question and a very good point. We are aware that even at the current list price of, let's say Humira, to pick a biologic at random, at random, there are patients that pay that, $6,000, $7,000 price point. So there is, in fact, a cash pay market, believe it or not. I will say the only way for us to know for sure is to try launching a biosimilar and see what happens. So, ask me again in 3 months, I would say what the extent of the cash pay market is. But, I think this will be a driver for us to, begin solving that chicken and the egg problem for plan sponsor adoption of our programs. Because we do currently function as a bolt-on or sort of add-on benefit. Think of our services as sort of a second insurance card for your employees that can be directed towards specific products. So we hope that it'll, the adoption of these biosimilars and us offering biosimilars that can save plan sponsors substantial amounts of money might drive adoption for the employee benefit solutions that we're hoping to offer more broadly, in addition to the direct-to-consumer cash pay.
And every time I've talked to you for the last couple of years, you'll always say, there'll be something more to talk about soon. So, but how specific?
There always is.
And there generally is. But how specific this time can you be about the next biosimilar you hope to sell?
Unfortunately, not very. I know transparency is our thing, but we operate under a lot of non-disclosure agreements to just facilitate our ability to do anything. So unfortunately, I'm going to leave you in suspense this time, Ed.
I'm sorry, but generally, can we expect to see something more over the next 6 months or halfway through the year?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopeful. We hope to offer, open ourselves as an open platform. We are willing to sell, pretty much any drug. We, as opposed to, a true PBM, we are a pharmacy, at the end of the day. or, at least, operate in partnership with pharmacies. We don't select winners and losers. We will offer any drug from a company that's willing to work with us at a transparent price under our terms. And yeah, I do think there is substantial interest from other manufacturers in using our platform. So I do think we will have, can't get into details, but I do think we'll have a substantial number of other biosimilars by the end of the year.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking through the chat as well.
Yeah,
ignoring it thus far.
before we leave, I
Yeah.
wanted to try and pull out a question.
Yeah.
So I have a curveball for you, though,
Okay.
not about biosimilars, but given the extensive concerns about drug shortages, a lot of it's focusing on generic injectable sterols for cancer. But your company buys a lot of generics right now, right? And you'll continue to do so. There'll be more of them. To what extent do you can you vet the manufacturers for quality issues so that there are no shortages, and also concerns about any adverse events? Because I read a lot about this problem emanating from India, where a lot of generics are made, whether they're oral or injectable medicines. And given that you're going to position yourself to become a bigger purveyor of medicines, that some of which come from that country, what can you tell us about any steps you're taking to make sure manufacturers adhere to GMP so that there are no hiccups or worse?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Working through our system.
I'm a physician, first do no harm. So we're very aware of issues of drug shortages. Across the street from me, we're building a CGMP manufacturing facility that's solely focused on producing drug shortage products, hopefully open and, knock wood, within the next few months. And we'll be manufacturing, those chemotherapy products that are on shortage, very focused on the pediatric chemotherapy market. So hopefully we'll have that up and running soon. But to your direct question, so, we do take that very seriously. I think I'm not sure actually if the other wholesalers do this, but we do contract with an independent testing laboratory and send random lots of the generic medications we receive to check for, is the amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient within the range that's promised under USP guidelines? Are there any contaminants in the product? And do withdraw, products if they don't meet quality and safety standards. We do audits of manufacturer partners. During the pandemic, those were largely paper audits due to travel concerns, but we do physical inspections as well, trying to grow that ability. We are a small organization and our capabilities are limited, but we do that as much as we can. So, we do take those considerations seriously. And a couple of the other things we're doing, sorry, I know we're at time, but I'll try to cut myself off quick. We actually, because we are a small organization, we actually pay generic companies more than the big purchasing conglomerates. So hopefully, that will lead to a more substantial, substantial revenue stream and more stability in the generic industry. But also, I mentioned we're standing up our wholesale platform that'll be opened up to institutional clients, hospitals within the next few months. And what we're doing there, we're experimenting with something where we're going to not pick just one, partner for each drug, but rather have it be an open platform for any generic company that's willing to list their products there. So you can see products from generic company A, B, C, and hopefully that will allow the generic manufacturers a more open marketplace and allow more vendors for each product type, which will build a more sustainable marketplace for the generic industry. Again, it's sort of an experiment on our part. We'll see how well it works, but I'm hopeful that will be part of the solution or could be part of the solution for shortage issues. Sorry, complex problem in 3 minutes.
They're all complex, but that's why we're here today. But unfortunately, we're just out of time. I want to thank you, Alex, for showing up as you did, and everyone here in the audience for being with us today. I hope you came away with some useful insights from Senator Grassley and from Alex Oshmansky of the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company. And it's nice seeing you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Ed.